Hi, I'm Jules. The question was about inclusion support for childcare centres. So what that involves is any eligible childcare centre. So that is a childcare centre that is federally run. Funded by the federal government. So if they have the childcare subsidy rebate, that means they're a federal and eligible childcare. So it could be any of the major chains, before and after school care, even family daycare. So any of those centre-based care are eligible for that. So what happens is KU or kindergarten run a group called the Inclusion Development Fund Manager. And within this is the Inclusion Support Program. Funding is just one element of that, but it's the one that parents are most familiar with because they'll need to fill out some forms and give consent to for their centre to apply for that funding. So there are other areas that within inclusion support, like they can upskill some of the educators, they can provide resources, materials. So they do other stuff as well, but we'll just talk about the inclusion support funding as that was the main question. So it's also important to note that it is the childcare or the daycare or the family daycare that apply for the funding. So as parents, you'll just fill out the paperwork forms and provide, if you can, any letters, reports, documents from any pediatricians, GPs, speech pathologists, occupational pathologists, you name it. So they will put forward the application and they do something called a strategic inclusion plan. So they look at what's working at their centre and what needs a bit of help, and like how each child would need help if they have additional needs or if they're having difficulty in an area such as speech and language, eating and drinking, movement, fine gross motor skills, any of those. So the funding works in a way of they provide, I think it's like $23 an hour to cover a support worker or someone to come in to the centre. They're not specifically trained as a speech pathologist, an occupational therapist or anything like that. What they are trained, and the main area of how this works is it's an extra person in the room. So in a childcare centre, it's all about ratio of children to adults. And with an extra adult in the room, it's an extra pair of hands that can really help move things along and make things a lot smoother and give the attention to the children that really need it in a way that's meaningful for them and that can be long lasting. So making visuals with that time, teacher training. So the way I use it, if there's inclusion support at a preschool or a childcare, I'll find out when they're coming in and then I'll go in at that time so that there's extra people and I can train the educators, show them the visuals I use, show them how I use them, draw small groups to work with children or even work with them one-on-one while teaching the educator, this is how we do it, here's some keyword sign, let's use it with the children, let's run a small group, great, set up some routines. So that was just one example. The other thing to remember is that key worker is not just for that one child. So there are children who have needs in every single childcare, so they may already have a support worker coming in, okay? So if there's 5 children in the classroom that need some help with speech, language, talking, walking, or any area of development, doesn't mean that there'll be 5 inclusion support workers. There will just typically be one, and it usually ranges from a couple of hours up to a maximum of 25 hours per week. And that's all decided outside of the preschool or childcare. So even if they fill out the forms correctly, you fill out the forms correctly, it's not guaranteed that inclusion funding will come through. In my experience, I have seen it at pretty much every preschool and childcare that I've been to. There was one and they filled out the forms and the childcare found it hard to hire someone. It could have been because of COVID or any number of reasons. So that was a pretty much one-off. So the $23 an hour that they receive doesn't always cover the funding for an extra worker. Sometimes they'll need to top that up out of their own funds of the childcare. And I have seen that happen, which is fantastic. If it's a family daycare, so the family daycare's at home where there's 2 to 5 children as such, they will get a top up on their daily amount to use toward an additional worker. So there's no time frame per se and into how long it takes to get the forms together or get a response. The the best website that I found, which was updated recently and is super easy to navigate, is www.idfm.org.au, and you just click the link that says for families. So on this website, it tells you everything about it, what criteria you need. Basically, you don't need a diagnosis per se, so you don't have to have a literal diagnosis, but you do need to prove that your child has additional needs or is struggling in some area. So generally a letter from a GP or a pediatrician, a doctor to support that. Even a letter from like a speech pathologist or a report will also outline that. So the other website that's really good is www.inclusionagency.org.au. So inclusion support do talk with the childcare centre, but I spoke to them recently and they said they're also happy to support families in answering any questions. So if you've got a pen, their phone number is 1-800-703-383. I hope you found this helpful. Feel free to keep the questions coming through and I'll keep making videos.